hola, and marhaba to another Gen Z AMIGAS weekly podcast, where young global voices explore the biggest trends shaping our world. I'm Maha, your host and moderator today. This week, we're tackling one of the most pressing topics for young professionals: breaking free from 9 to 5, how and why Gen Z is redefining work. Unlike millennials who had years of in-office experience before remote work became an option, Gen Z is now entering a workforce where remote work is often the default. But is that a good thing? We don't know. So over the next 20 minutes, we'll break this down into three major segments. Gen Z and remote work, is it an opportunity or a career trap? Career growth in a remote first world. How do you stand out when you're not physically present? And the future of work, is Gen Z killing the 9 to 5 or simply reshaping it? And now today joining me are two incredible guests who bring different perspectives to the table. Tess Ruddel, studying PPLE at Oxford University, who has been analyzing trends in law and politics and the changing world landscape. And Sofia Mena, already existing guest who has been on Gen Z Amigas, studying law and BBA at IE University Spain, bringing insights from the legal and business world. So let's dive right in to the first segment. So Gen Z is entering the workforce in a completely different landscape from previous generations. And remote work isn't a privilege anymore. It's often the default. But is that actually a disadvantage? Tess, I want to start with you. Many would argue that remote work limits mentorship and our career growth because us Gen Z are missing out on in-person learning experiences. Do you think that working remotely from the start of our career puts young professionals at a disadvantage?
I mean, yeah, I definitely do. I think there's a lot that you gain from being in the workplace. And I think ultimately, when you go into your first job, especially in things like interviews, lots of what you're getting out of it isn't isn't necessarily the technical skills, but I mean, it's the people skills that come along with it. It's the kind of structure that comes with being in the workplace. It's the fact that you're expected to be at a meeting at a certain time. You're expected to have these kind of small chat conversations around, I don't know, while you're making a coffee, for example. There's lots of skills that come with being in the office that I definitely do think that you lose when you're online. I mean, ultimately online, even if you're just joining things like formal meetings, yes, you're still getting those interactions and you are still building up those people skills, but it's not really the same because you're doing so in such a formal, structured environment. And if you think about ultimately what can drive you through your career, it's being able to really build a kind of personal repertoire with the people that you're working with and the clients that you're expected to meet. And I think lots of those small skills that feed into that come from just general attendance to the workplace. So personally, even though while it's really nice to have the flexibility, I definitely do think that there is a big detriment of not being in.
Hmm. And Sophia, I'd like to bring a point to you. You go to university in one of the most high-tech digital universities, at least within Europe, where remote work is an option and many classes are done away from the classroom, such as asynchronous classes. Do you think this helps or hurts us young students who are going to become professionals in our preferred industry?
Well, I think it always varies depending on the industry, first of all. But I think it does bring some flexibility that's good. So some asynchronous activities are nice because then you can plan around that. Our university, though, I don't think has a schedule that allows us to have like an in-person job or part-time job at the same time because it's so like it changes from week to week and it's not like a stable schedule. So I think that for us at the moment, it's good to have the opportunity and remote work is like the best thing that we could do right now as we're students. And the asynchronous classes and other work, that I mean, I don't love it, but I think it's a good way to maintain a different and like a more dynamic way of education.
Mhm. So, so then, bring on to like what you're saying. Do you think that us as students having that kind of flexibility do you think it will help or hurt us as when we go into the workplace? Do you think that we could kind of use it to our advantage, or do you think that
Well,
it may
definitely.
burden us? Yeah.
Well, I think it
Okay.
definitely helps that we are used to it. We
Hmm.
know how to do the remote work. It's not something foreign to us that we had to learn, maybe like our parents' generation when they had to start doing remote work in the pandemic. So we're definitely exposed to it, which is something good. On the other hand, though, I do think that as a generation, we are losing those people skills that Tess was talking about before. So I think a mix is really good, which is something that the university has done well with the asynchronous classes and the in-person classes. So I think ultimately it's gonna help us if we are able to maintain those personal and soft skills and develop those as well.
Hmm. Yeah. And Tess, I'd like to bring on to that kind of point of our skills and what we could maybe bring to the workplace. So, do you feel like us Gen Z are maybe missing out on key workplace experiences or skills that we could use when we are in person in the workplace that maybe millennials had before they transitioned to remote work?
I think one thing that we definitely struggle with as a generation is that we're quite, aside from family connections, I feel like we're quite insular as a generation and that lots of other
Hmm.
generations don't really understand us. Like you probably hear your parents or anyone who's older kind of saying, "Oh, Gen Z, you guys speak a foreign language and your whole way of life is just so
Yeah.
different to us." And I think that's a bit worrying because I think the workplace is definitely the main place where we'd be able to get those skills and kind of demystify Gen Z effectively. Um,
Hmm.
Whether it be that we pick up skills that mean that we start to understand older generations, or again, older generations find us a bit more approachable. I think the workplace is definitely a key place to do that. So, again, maybe this is a slightly traditional perspective, but even those kind of ideas of deference that kind of underpin workplace structure and workplace hierarchy, I definitely think that we lose those a little bit from working from home because you're not interacting on a regular basis with people that are directors and managers because you're obviously shut away. And unless you're having those direct meetings with them, you're not really going to be in contact with them. So just the kind
Hmm.
of normal skills of deference, I think, are definitely really important. And again, just kind of showing that Gen Z aren't necessarily, or trying to break out of the stereotype that Gen Z are almost perceived as quite a selfish generation that can't really
Hmm.
understand um, these kind of hierarchies that do exist. And I definitely think that's both perpetuated and probably slightly a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy if we are out of the workplace.
Hmm. Yeah.
I mean,
No, yeah, go ahead.
I definitely agree. But also we still don't really know how we work in the workplace because most of
Mhm.
us are still like just out of college. Like we are just graduating, starting our first jobs. So we still don't really know how to integrate ourselves into the workplace, like as formally as maybe our parents knew exactly what the hierarchy that you're talking about is. Like, you're going to be an intern, like you're the lowest of the low. And,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
here, since we have like these remote opportunities, we might already have experience before we go into an actual physical workplace. So you might know a lot more than the person who's your boss. But since they see you as like a younger person,
Mm,
there's this bias that we don't know anything,
mm,
and we must like
Mhm.
we have to do something to be like, okay, like we have to work hard, like how they expect us to work hard, but it's kind of tough,
mm,
like
Yeah.
the incomer.
Yeah.
mm,
Yeah. So that kind of brings me to my next point about for millennials, networking happened in organically in offices and at coffee breaks or through conversations. And so, Tess, I kind of want to bring
mm.
the question to you, kind of moving off from Sophia's point. Like, do you think that Gen Z can still build strong careers, and what can we do to stand out in a remote environment or without ever kind of setting foot in an office?
See, I do think it's really difficult actually.
Yeah.
Because I think when you're not provided with those in-person networking opportunities, you are really missing out on that kind of opportunity just to name drop, just to kind of show your face and be like, hey, I'm here. Can you remember me? Um, I do think, yeah, when you can't put a name to a face and draw upon an actual conversation that you've had with someone senior, I think it's really difficult. And I know there is so much talk about reaching out on LinkedIn and using LinkedIn as a platform. And I'm not necessarily like anti-LinkedIn at all, but I know that lots of people that I've spoken to who are more senior in business have very polarizing views on LinkedIn. Some people do think it's a great place in terms of promoting yourself and getting yourself out there, and it definitely is something that I think that we do just have to do. But at the same time, I know other people who, where they've had loads of active messages, it's been a bit too intense for some people. So I think use LinkedIn to your advantage, definitely. But I think I know some people who are constantly trying to message people that they can find on LinkedIn to try and do this, do that. And obviously it does show proactivity. So I'm not trying to knock it, but I think there's definitely a balance to be struck in terms of not coming across as too persistent or too like like harassing almost these poor directors on LinkedIn as well. So I definitely do think there's a balance to be struck with that. It's definitely a tool, but at the same time, I don't think it's a substitute for in-person networking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Sophia, I kind of want to, add on in terms of what Tess was saying about like industries and, you know, thriving on digital networking in terms of, like Tess said, LinkedIn and reaching out, and our generation proactively kind of using LinkedIn as quite a source. We all hear, all of us are like, oh, we can't get any internships, or it's so hard to get internships. So, in terms of many industries thriving on digital networking, do you think that Gen Z can still build meaningful professional relationships entirely online?
No, I really don't. I think you can start like that. And it also depends. Like for me, I have both. I have the BBA and the law aspect. I think it's much harder to do the remote work for law than for BBA. So for business, I think it's more likely that you'll be able to, I don't know, get an internship, get more connections, and the type of job that you will get, or the internship you get is it's easier to do it online, and there's more opportunities for that. The law part is practically impossible. Like you need to go out there, you need to meet the people, you need to like be with the client, you need to be there, because would you really trust a lawyer that you only see through a screen and that you don't know anything about?
Mm-hmm.
Like probably not. So for law, definitely not. Like I think it's very doubtful that it'll ever become an only online thing. But on the business side, it's possible. Would I recommend it? Probably not. I agree fully with Tess, and I think that like as a generation, we're really losing this like social connection and like personal relationships other than like family and friends. Like we need to be out. We're humans, we're social by nature, and we can't stay behind the screen forever. So as Tess said, like I completely agree. It's a tool that we can use for sure, but I doubt that like I think it's very unlikely that a whole industry or a whole sector will become fully online, because you still need that personal connection.
Yeah. Yeah, networking is more about in-person interactions and how you come off as a person, how you make that impression, and how the person you were networking with is going to remember you. And it's like they're not going to remember, oh, that's your CV or your LinkedIn. They're going to be like, oh, Tess was quite an impressive character, etc. And I believe that in order to make a lasting impact on people in the work field, it has to be face to face. And so, kind of moving on to the next segment, the traditional 9 to 5 work model is changing rapidly. Gen Z are questioning the need for offices, considering freelancing, or looking for flexible career paths. But is the 9 to 5 model really dead, or is it just evolving? So, Tess, I want to hear your thoughts. We hear a lot about hybrid work and freelancing becoming the new normal. Do you think that these models will fully replace the 9 to 5 structure, or is it, just a phase?
I think we definitely are seeing the. Oh, okay, actually, I'll caveat that first. I think it's definitely industry dependent. Would be the first thing that I'll say. But I think we definitely are seeing a movement away from hybrid work. I think ultimately it was something that came in the pandemic, out of necessity, because obviously people couldn't travel in, and there was
Yes.
bit of almost like a hangover of it in the 2 years that followed. But I think now we definitely are seeing, like, for example, I follow the finance trends quite a lot, and lots of offices now are calling for you have to be full back in the workplace. Perhaps at high levels of seniority, you might be able to get one day off, but for anybody in their first kind of 5 to 10 years of working there, you're expected to be in the office 24/7. Just again, building on loads of the things that we've just spoken about in terms of the skills and the need for these kind of informal relations, recognition of hierarchy. It's becoming really important. I think lots of workplaces have noticed that they've suffered and their intern takes have not had the skills that perhaps they've needed them to through the hybrid system. So I think whilst definitely there has been lots of talk about hybrid, I do think that lots of industries will now start to reject it and start to move back in where they've still got the office space that's available. Obviously, there is a slight constraint there. Some places have started to sell off offices. But no, I definitely do think that we'll see a movement back in the other direction. And I think it's interesting to see how Gen Z will respond to that, because there's almost been a bit now of an assumption that we are going to get hybrid work, I think. And a lot of people, I don't know whether people will again maybe misread situations and come in and try to make demands for flexible working when offices would just be like, no, sorry, you have to be in the whole time. So I don't know whether again there'll be that slight disconnect between the Gen Z expectations and the expectations of directors and millennials moving forward, but we'll see.
Sophia, do you think that freelancing and kind of having our choice for our own careers, do you think that it's a sustainable career path for young professionals?
Well, for me personally, I think, I mean, I'm kind of weird, but I kind of like the 9 to 5, the structure
Okay.
that you get and the discipline that you get from it. So for me personally, I don't think I'd be able to succeed in freelancing or just being like an entrepreneur, like right out of college, like never having a boss. And I mean, it's the dream, like just work for yourself. Don't have a boss, be your own boss. Like you decide what you do with your own time, but you still don't have the experience, right? I think we as a generation, we need to be a little more aware that yes, we do have all these technological advances. We have access to so much knowledge, but we don't have the life experience that other generations have. So I think we do need to like take a step back, learn, learn something for real in the real life, go out there. And then when you want to freelance, and then if you want to do your own thing, I think you're going to be much more prepared with better tools and with much more experience. And then definitely that's a stable thing that you can do. And for a future, if you want to freelance and not stay in a 9 to 5 job.
I think just building on that really quickly, I think that's actually a really interesting point in terms of what you're saying about stepping back, because I definitely do think that social media has kind of created this perception of the freelancer as being like the ideal dream in terms of, like you're saying, you don't have your own boss, etc. And I mean, like Dubai is a hotspot for that, Maha. I'm sure you've seen as well.
Yeah.
Loads of people coming to Dubai being like, oh, I trade now, I can now do this. And for some people that has worked, and it's been amazing that it's worked for them. I'm not trying to say that, but I'm saying that it's created this kind of social media perception that it's easy to do. And I think a lot of people, again, like you're saying, are saying, no, I'm going to reject the structure. I'm going to follow what I'm seeing people doing online, and I'm going to try and be my own boss. And again, like you're saying, not having any of the experience or the skills to really understand what that means and what the people that are what the situation of the people that are proclaiming on social media that they're doing amazing actually is, and B, what their background is and the skills that they might have to make that successful.
I definitely agree.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I believe that in-person work is the way to go. That's where real efficiency, productivity, meaningful professional relationships take place. We risk losing the kind of person-to-person interactions that lead to mentorship, organic networking, and that kind of like deep collaboration. And it also begs the question, are we becoming antisocial? Could hybrid work actually be making us less engaged in the workplace and with each other? And that said, I do recognize that hybrid work is inevitable in today's world in some ways. Fully in-person office environments are becoming rare, in my personal experience, looking for internships and work. And most companies now offer that kind of hybrid structure. So while I prefer in-person work, I do think hybrid work could be said as becoming the new normal. The real question is, how do we make sure we don't lose the benefits of that, traditional workplace culture while adapting to the shift? And I just want to thank you guys because that is actually a wrap on today's episode of Gen Z Amigas. A huge, huge thank you to you both, Tess and Sofia, for sharing your insights on how Gen Z is reshaping the future of work. To our listeners, what do you think? Are we witnessing the death of the 9 to 5, or is it just evolving into something new? Let's continue this conversation. Drop your thoughts in the comments, share this episode, and tag us on LinkedIn, Climate Penpal, and YouTube. Until next time, goodbye and shukran.